You're listening to Edge Radio 99.3. That was I Love Work by Butterfingers, and this is Media Tackle. I'm Craig Norris, PhD. You know, I think I need to drop some knowledge that I'm qualified somewhat to talk to today's guest, MC Dent, who is an actor as well as a event host. And what we're going to drill down into is his history, his life experiences, working in this mystery world for some of conventions, particularly pop culture conventions, anime, manga. Have you done science fiction as well?
Science fiction? My goodness, that's a good question. I've done astronomy.
An astronomy event?
Yeah, I emceed at TASTROFest last year in Ulverston.
What was it called?
TASTROFest.
Trofest. Like Trofest is like Trofest. What is that a word from? That's
as in Taz and Astro put together. TASTRO.
TASTRO. And then it's Fect?
Fest.
TASTROFest. I like that. That's not too much of a mouthful. But when I brought you in, again, this is a show talking about everything in and around the world of media, including pop culture and bizarre artifacts that come out into that world, is, you know, it seems like a space which for me is even more interesting because of the COVID experience, right? That events, conventions, people coming together to celebrate a shared affinity and interest in everything from, it could be Doctor Who, Japanese animation, music. What are some of the other events which have brought together affinities that you've hosted?
I think you've pretty much covered the big ones. If you're looking for events where I've hosted sort of outside of those spaces, I did a convention last year called Blades of the Coast Nerdfest, which was up in Penguin, and that was sort of primarily a gaming event. They had a very big live action role play element happening outside.
Live action role play. Now, for those that don't know, you've got two things going on there, live action, and then you've got role play. So role play, Dungeons and Dragons space, right? So role playing would be within that fictional universe space of Dungeons and Dragons, but then the live action element is people in costumes.
Yep.
Is that right?
Absolutely. So things like medieval recreation is definitely a very major subculture within the LARP community. There was definitely a Dungeons and Dragons component. There was a table of people who were playing a game basically all weekend. I think just a 2-dayer. Maybe I think there was a learn to play element in there as well, or it could have just been one event. And also the Launceston Lightsaber Academy.
Yes.
People who dress up in Jedi robes and have lightsaber duels.
Now, you've been brought into their orbit again through some involvement yourself, or is this just another fantastic, fabulous event which goes on here in Tasmania?
Another one of those amazing events that goes on in Tasmania. It's just.
Have you seen it in the flesh? Have you seen the Tasmania, Launceston lightsaber?
Yeah, because they were at Blades of the Coast Nerdfest, and they've been at MyCon, which is up in the north of Tasmania, run by Taspop. One year, I actually asked them very politely if they would give us a demonstration during the judging of the cosplay competition, because that's always a bit of an area where the judges need to sit down and really thrash out who they think deserves to win, because it can get very, very heated and very competitive. And it's really good to have something flashy to put on the stage to keep people from walking away before they've heard the events. And Launceston Lightsaber Academy having a duel was exactly what we needed.
So even in the small microcosm that is Tasmania, it is a entry point into this bigger world of popular culture, like real life popular culture engagement. That is, you might have watched the Star Wars films on television. You might have read comics. But a convention is one of these spaces that, it's in a physical location. So often it might be on university grounds. Where are some of the locations where these conventions are held? The Derwent Entertainment Center, I know one year the anime convention was held there. What are the other spaces where these conventions typically break out and occur?
Probably the most, if we're looking at Tasmania, the one that is most frequently used, I'd say, would be Rest Point.
Right. Not in the casino, but in its kind of display area and venue area.
I mean, people have certainly snuck off and done photo shoots, sort of in the wider casino area, but they have a convention centre downstairs, and Taspop has run conventions there for many years. They ran ARCon there between 2014 and 2018. Hopefully, there's more to come, and in that space, of course. And Taz Sci-Fi Con, they ran two conventions in 2008, 2009. They ran in the same venue.
Yeah, look, and I was really impressed myself going to many of these events, including the Taz Sci-Fi one, where people brought out their memorabilia. Because I guess for those that have never been to a convention, it involves a lot of moving pieces and objects. So, you'll have a kind of maybe a memorabilia area, display area. Then you'll have the vendors who'll be there from various stores selling their wares. What video game space in Tasmania? If we take, for example, the latest ones, which have been running the Enemy Island conventions, what are some of the events which go on there that you've been involved in?
Events within the convention, the really big one tends to be the cosplay competition.
And what cosplay, for those that might not know, is?
Costume play, where people design their own costumes and they make them out of different kinds of materials. Probably the most commonly seen material, I think, would probably be camping mats. They're made out of a foam that is really, really useful for making armor with. There used to be a bit of a stigma against purchasing your own outfit via the internet rather than actually making it yourself. There was a bit of a stigma against buying things, but that seems to have alleviated a fair bit.
And what a lot of people, I guess, might not know is that you do have costumes for people going to these conventions in costumes. And some of the stereotypes that people might have seen on television include, the big Star Trek convention that might happen in America where everyone's dressed up as a Star Trek character or something. Here, what people might not be aware of is that not only can it involve going to the convention in costume, but then participating in an event in costume. So as you were saying, one of the big events that happens is the cosplay event where how would you describe it? Would you say it's kind of like a fashion show mixed with a bit of dramatic theatrics occasionally, and then an interview? How would you unpack the cosplay event?
That's a pretty good way of summarizing it. So generally, a cosplay convention will have a category for things like best construction, best skit. Skits are not mandatory. In certain high-level events, I do believe they are mandatory, such as the Madman National Cosplay Championship. But in most conventions, it's not necessary. You can just go and strike a pose. But quite often people, they'll write sort of detailed, they might be comedy skits, they might try to be dramatic. Sometimes they go for a horror aspect. And after they perform that, then the MC will ask them a few questions. So there's a very brief interview where you'll ask them about how they make the costume, what's their favorite part, things like that, just to shine a little bit more information on how they've made it and why they made it and why that character might be special to them, or if not the character, then the costume.
And you've emceed many of these, so part of that is your formal responsibility, right? You'll be up there emceeing a cosplay event, and part of the convention of that is talking a little bit with the person who has come in the costume, breaking down where they made it. And again, this is where that point about, did you make this yourself? If you were to say, oh, I just bought it from the store, it kind of limits the conversation somewhat, or at least it places the value of what you've presented slightly differently. Because I do know myself sitting in the audience, there's nothing more heartwarming than those stories that are told by the the person in costume about their mum working up late with them to get it done. It's a family affair. Have you heard? Is that quite a common thing from your experience? These kind of family stories coming through, or these stories of the labor and intensity involved in the costume?
I think every convention will definitely have at least one person who worked on it with their mother or grandmother or some other family member. Definitely myself. I haven't competed in cosplay competitions since I think 2012, but my grandmother actually, I asked her for help making a cape, and then I gave her a call and said, "Okay, Grandma, Nana, when are we going to start making this cape?" She says, "Oh, it's already all ready to go, lovey." And she just banged out this incredible opera cape with a flaming skull on the back, just by herself. And I thought it'd be a great bonding experience, but I was just blown away by the effortlessness with which she did it. Though she did say, "This is the last time I'm doing this." It was a bit of a, because she was an extremely talented seamstress, just an absolute wizard when it came to textiles. But I think that one was a little bit more complex than what she was used to, and so she was very happy that was, I guess, her crowning achievement, because it ended up winning fan favorite when I entered it at Icon 2011, and I've won that a few times since.
And did you have that as part of the narrative? Was there an opportunity for you to talk about that story in front of the audience?
Not at that one, just because I wasn't entering, because fan favorites, that's something that generally happens after the main competition. So the main competition, everyone gets about 3 minutes of time, and they get to have a chat about it. And just on that note, when you're asking them questions, there's been some criticism. Certain parties have said that they think that MCs asking questions of the contestants is boring and just slows the pace of the event down. But it's not so much trying to slow things down. It's really putting the spotlight, the audience focus on the people who've spent all that time and effort constructing these costumes. It's just getting up and doing a twirl and posing. I mean, sure, that if generally you'll have prejudging, and it's great for the judges to know what went into it, but the audience really needs to know as well, to really sort of highlight how much effort that person's put in.
Now, prejudging, that's where before the kind of fashion display of it occurs, the judges will talk a little bit with the cosplayers themselves and talk about their creation of the costume. Is that what we're talking about?
Absolutely. And that means that the judge has a more informed view of what's gone into the costume, so that it makes judging, I suppose, less of an intensive process, because they're already familiar with it by the time that and contestant steps on stage. They're not sort of piecing it all together as it all happens on the fly. There's a greater element of preparation to it.
Let's go back to that point you were raising about feedback you've received from audiences around emceeing a cosplay event. So some of them have said the MC, as you were saying, some of them will say the MC asking questions kind of interrupts those flows. It did make me think there are multiple audiences you're dealing with as a host or as a MC for a cosplay event. You've got that section of the audience who would say, the MC shouldn't ask any questions. It should just be next. What are those? How would you characterize that audience, right? Those people that don't want questions, they just want the display of costume. I mean, because I guess if without the questions, what is that event? So without questions from the cosplayer or to the cosplayer, we've got, person in very elaborate costume from, the latest anime comes out. It's almost like a fashion show at that point, right? They don't say anything, and that audience is just engaging with the visuals of it.
Yep. And fashion shows are absolutely events that do happen at conventions. You'll have often there'll be a showcase where people do get up and they twirl and they pose, and then they head off stage after a couple of photos.
There's an applied applause.
Oh, absolutely. Audiences generally love to give applause and show their appreciation. But that's more of a sort of a showcase. You'll often have both events at a convention. You'll have a cosplay competition, which is the more in-depth, 3 minutes per contestant, doing the questions and potentially a skit, whereas a showcase is more of a fashion parade. It's more of a pageant where they strut their stuff and then just head off straight afterwards.
Because I guess, yeah, at the other level, at the other extreme, so you've got that space and that audience that's expecting it just to be like a fashion parade. Then at the other space, you probably have people who, I guess if we think about that cliche of a type of Miss America competition, right? So the expectation is they're going to be stopped and they're going to be asked a question, and part of the judgment, I guess the response to the question is never part of the judgment per se. So in a Miss America competition, there's always that narrative of, okay, are they going to demonstrate intelligence? Are they going to demonstrate a level of sophistication? We're not judging their answer in terms of is it right or wrong. But there is this kind of curiosity of, okay, what's the story behind this? Which is also really appealing to find to. As someone in an audience, I'm always actually more interested to hear about the story behind the costume. Do you think that's a big part of the audience there, that they actually do want, some members of the audience do want to hear about how this costume was made?
Absolutely. And quite often you'll say, how long did this take you to make? And they'll say, oh, it took X number of hours, or it took, X number of months off and on. Or I was working on this until 5 a.m. Then I got 2 hours sleep and had to drive to the convention and do my makeup and get into this and get zipped up. And that's often where you hear the audience going,
Yeah.
ooh, and just those cheers of appreciation, and often that'll get a huge round of applause. And just one of my favorite cliches to slip in there is, oh, it's 100 hours well spent.
Because many people would have no idea how much effort is required to put these costumes together if you've never done it yourself, right? They'd look at this costume and think, okay, well, wow. But then hearing that story of how much labor goes into it really paints a bigger picture of the labor, the unpaid labor, which is connected to it. So in your experience hosting, while we're drilling down into the cosplay event, are there any memorable moments you remember offhand where you've been up there asking questions of cosplayers and either it's worked really well or it hasn't worked at all and something's come apart either in their response, they've had stage fright, or they've completely said the wrong thing at the wrong time, or equally have there been moments it's just really come together and made this memorable moment?
Ooh, that's a pretty difficult question to answer, because I actually find I generally don't tend to remember the events that I've hosted. I don't remember the specifics because I'm always really hopped up on adrenaline when I am on stage, and as soon as I walk off, it all falls out of my brain. I do remember one time at a convention about 5 years ago up in Sydney, interviewing someone for whom English was not their first language, and there was a bit of a language barrier, and that was a bit of an uncomfortable thing, because I felt like I guess I was asking too much of the contestant by just asking general questions. So what I did there was I got the audience to give them a very massive round of applause, and politely excused myself from the situation and called the next contestant up on stage.
Because I can imagine what that would have been like. You would have asked like that question, how long did this take to make? And there's silence, and there's maybe a word, and then you kind of push ahead with the second one. Wow, that must have been really interesting. Why did you do this and that? And where did that come from? And then silence. And it's awkward, isn't it? Because again, that feeling of, well, we've just got to, and as you're saying, energized and bringing, and again, having seen you on stage, a lot of energy coming together on that. And you want to keep that energy up, not risking kind of those kind of awkwardnesses to slow down the rhythm. So again, just how did people respond to it afterwards? Do you hear, I mean, I guess in the moment, as you're saying, it's a bit of a blur. Do you remember any people talking about afterwards the event, saying, well, you did that really well, or that was something surprising, or the kind of advice afterwards, or admiration afterwards?
I don't think that there was really any discussion of that from the audience, because that was in a nighttime event. So and that person actually, they won the whole event. They had done an incredible job on their outfit. But after that, it was just on to I think we had Hachio GP, who's a music producer and DJ from Japan. He came along. He DJ'd a set. So there was really no sort of discussion afterwards. It was just on to the next event.
Has the cosplay scene changed then over time that you found? I mean, just briefly talking about your own history within the convention experience. As you said, you cosplayed a little bit yourself, and then you moved into the MC role. Let's talk about some dates. What dates can you remember this starting from? How long have you been MCing for? When was the first gig that you started performing at? Do you remember any of these histories you have?
Yeah, the first event that I MC'd at was Icon 2011, which is the one at the Derwent Entertainment Centre.
Right, yeah, and that's the one and only time it's been at the Derwent, right? Or has it been there since?
No, that was the only time. The Derwent Entertainment Centre is certainly an excellent venue, but it's not an excellent venue for an anime convention because it was very fragmented and sort of scattered all over the place.
Because again, as we were saying, there's all these moving pieces of an event. So again, you'll have the cosplay competition, but you have a traders hall, and yeah, you want that to have a kind of organic traffic flow around it. And yeah, I guess some venues, it just dissipates a little too much within a space.
Yeah, when you've got panels rooms and screening rooms and secondary theatres that are all scattered far away from the traders hall / main stage, it's generally not what you want for a live event that people are an interactive live event. I mean, again, I'm not dissing the deck by any stretch. It is an amazing venue. It's just for what we needed it for. Wasn't exactly what we really needed, but so the event that I hosted there, the first event, was a takeoff of the old improv comedy show. Thank God You're Here.
Right.
It was called Thank Kami You're Here because Kami is the Japanese word for God. And I'd actually been working with I had sort of directed it. I'd been working with a team of committee members who are also really funny and really good actors. And we'd sort of practiced running improvisational events, and we would get contestants on who had no idea what we were working on and get them to sort of fill in the blanks and be the lead character in that scene and try to make it up as they all went along.
So if people don't remember, the setup for Thank God You're Here, was that the name of that show?
Yep.
Yeah, it was improv actor would open a door, walk through it, not know what the scene was, and then had to improvise reactions to the actors that were there in that scene, and often to comedic effect. So here you guys were taking that format and working in a kind of anime bent to it. So you're all in costume or pop culture bent to it. Did it work well? How did it go? Do you have vivid memories of that experience? I mean, it did get picked up for other conventions. Or the following conventions after that, right? So it must have had some success.
Yeah, it was at Icon for about 4 or 5 years. No, probably longer than that because it was around before I came on board. But no, people liked it. They were laughing. People always enjoy improv comedy and watching people getting flustered and trying to figure out what to say next on stage. But the one thing that really stuck in my mind from that was that, appropriately enough, it opened with me and one of the other committee members improvising some stuff because we'd lost one of our contestants, and so we'd sent a couple of volunteers off running around the convention center trying to find them. And myself and the then president, we were just standing there awkwardly on stage holding microphones. I'm just thinking to myself, what do we do next? And then I just held it out like a lightsaber, went and we just had a lightsaber duel with microphones on stage.
And there is a bit of atmosphere that takes over in those settings where it's like by fans and for fans, where there's a kind of organic in-joke which starts to emerge. And within that in-joke culture, what are some of the through lines that have kind of picked up? I know in auctions, for instance, some of the auctions you've done in these conventions, they have become almost mythic objects, right? These objects which are very boring, but they start having stories told about them in auctions. Do you recall, I can't remember, like it was a stick or something?
The stick.
You're right, the stick. So unpack the stick idea. So this was at an auction.
This was at AvCon 2017 up in Adelaide. And that had sort of a summer festival vibe to it. And they had dancers who had I guess, bits of dowel from Bunnings, which they were using as sticks in their fertility dances. And I said, "Oh, could I have one of those as my gavel?" And the other guys went, "Oh, sure. I don't see any problem with that." So I get up on stage, and immediately, and there's about probably 1,000 people in the audience. They're going, "The stick!"
Because they saw you with this prop that was a stick, and the audience were just narrating a kind of mystical objectness to it, the stick. Did they know it was the fertility stick from those other cosplayers?
I don't know. I don't know if they remember.
Because I didn't know it was a fertility stick. That lends it even more narrative unusualness for it to be reappropriated as a auction mallet. Okay, but then you are with the stick. So you hadn't, I mean, this is improvisation at its height in terms of you hadn't at all expected this banal object to be transformed into something this 1,000-seat audience was simply going to name. So where did you take it next? So people started gasping and saying, "The stick."
I kind of didn't draw any attention to it at the beginning because the Avcon auction at that point was a 30-minute affair. It was get in, sell the stuff, get out. But I actually wandered off stage and I said to the organizers, "So can we sell this?" And they went, "Yeah, sure, cool." So people were saying, "Sell us the stick," and I ended up selling it as the last item. I cannot remember how much it went for. The video's up on the YouTube channel, I think.
Did it go for more than you'd expected? Was it an amount that at the time you felt surprised at?
I can't remember. It either went for $250 or it went for $500. I think it went for $250, which for a bit of dowel from Bunnings. That's a pretty big markup.
Well, this is one of the things that I guess is very difficult for people to understand about conventions if they've never been to one. The type of atmosphere that can take over a space if you're in the right place at the right time. And often that right place at the right timeness is that these conventions will go for 2 days often, sometimes more. What's the average number of days of a convention that in Australia you've been to?
I'd say probably 2.5.
Yep, normally a weekend.
Yeah, because bump in happens on Friday. Everyone gets because everyone's got to have their stalls set up for Saturday morning, and these are full-on retail stores full of figures, graphic novels, other books, and DVDs and clothing and the like. So you can't just show up early on Saturday morning and throw it all together. That takes time to set up. So people will generally set up on a Friday. And if you've got the venue and you're paying for it, you may as well have an event on Friday night. So often you'll have a karaoke night or a quiz night or an opening ceremony on Friday night.
And often your MCing is starting then as well.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So and then it goes through till Sunday night. So that's essentially 3 nights and 2 days.
And the size of the crowd. So you'd obviously have peaks on like a Saturday afternoon or something. And but you would have a consistent audience. You'd have people that have been at the convention since it started to since it ends, who are kind of involved in this organic storytelling which happens, right? These are the people that will be creating mystical objects out of a gavel or stick. How do those numbers fluctuate over the weekend? Do most people stay there, or is there a hardcore community that then bonds and go places together?
I'd say the hardcore community would be composed of people who get there early on the Saturday. Often they'll usually come in with their existing friendship groups, but it's certainly not unheard of for people to meet at conventions and just click, and then suddenly they're besties and they've known each other all their lives. But yeah, absolutely. The people who sort of imbue those mundane things with the mythical aura are the ones who've been there all weekend. Often you get mum and dad bring the kids in for a Saturday, walk around, head off. So Saturday is almost always the biggest day. I don't think I've ever seen Sunday be bigger than Saturday. Sunday is when you mostly get returning people.
And what's so I'm fascinated by the stick. So if we take the stick, where does that go next in terms of how connected is one of the things that you have particularly good insight into is not just the Tassie scene, that you've MC'd other states, anime conventions and pop culture conventions. So this stick narrative came about in Sydney at Smash, was it? Or AvCon?
Adelaide? AvCon. So I woke up on Monday morning and I got a message from a friend saying, "So I heard you started a religion." And I went, "What?" And I check on Facebook and there are 3 or 4 Facebook pages that have been made for the stick of AvCon, and people have written paragraphs of lore about it.
And this is almost, I mean, you hear these things happening with the kind of Pastafarians that start up an alternative religion around the colander on the head, and then also the kind of Twitch plays Pokemon, right? So there are these moments where the most unlikely of spaces generates myth building. So the stick, does that still continue today? So this was 2011, was it?
That was 2017.
2017?
And 2018. Flying up from Hobart, I get to the convention center and we do the opening ceremony. And as soon as I step up on stage to do my introductory speech, because all the MCs got introduced at the beginning of the event. Not the beginning of the opening ceremony, but about a reasonable way into it. Anyway, and as soon as I step up to the mic, I just hear this group of people down the front right hand stage of the audience going, "The stick, the stick, the stick." I just go, oh, wow.
And these were followers of the stick.
These were followers of the stick. So at the end of my introductory speech, I said, "Okay, repeat after me. All hail the stick." Held out the microphone, and the entire audience shouts back, "All hail the stick!" And that was one of my happiest moments as a performer ever.
Isn't that true? Yeah.
Of all the events I've hosted and all the plays I've been in, probably the best moment was just having an audience yell, "All hail the stick" back at me.
Because you could never manufacture that. You could never plan it. It happened so spontaneously, and then really, got circulated through that grassroots community with the Facebook pages starting up the stick religion, and it got carried over to the next year. Does it still continue now? Is there much of a thread of the stick still within AvCon, or has it kind of gone to other conventions? Have there been any?
It hasn't gone to other conventions, but I suppose it reached its climax in 2019 because we jokingly sold a box in 2018 at the quiz night on the Saturday. People, because the auction's on Sunday night, people came in and they said, "The box," pointing at a cardboard box, and so we sold that to the same guy.
So go back to the box. So the box was the box used for...
It was just a cardboard box that some prizes were in for the quiz night. And people were just pointing out and going, "The box." And so we sold that for $250 at the auction as well. And it was to the same guy who actually showed up in 2019, and he'd stuck them together and made them into a giant hammer.
Really? 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 So, okay, so 2019, you had the audience again... kind of latched onto a banal object, in this case a cardboard box, which had been used at another event, but was on the stage, right? People could see this box. But it was basically just a cardboard box, which had what was it, the prizes in it for the quiz night?
For the quiz night in 2018, yeah.
But then they started to name it. They started to say the box, the box, the box, and then you sold it off for an equally inconceivable amount, right? I mean, this is a bizarre economy which is occurring here. The thing is that the economy only exists because it couldn't be created by you. You couldn't go in there and say, okay, this is the next magical object. It's kind of organically chosen by the audience. Then you have to decide, are we at a point that we really ride this wave, right? Is there enough kind of audience backing of this box to say, okay, let's commit to it, so that, because I guess the thing is, you don't want to be seen as exploiting that space or making money off the fans. You are making money off the fans, but you're making money consensually in a way where it's growing the myth, right? That the amount of money that this object's about to earn is part of its mythological power, right? That this object now is endowed with power, right? It's no longer a worthless box from Woolworths, wherever it was picked up from. It is now the box sold for this amount of money to the same guy who's an interesting author here, right? So he would have been outbid. Do you remember much about the bidding process? Was he outbidding someone else? Did it become part of a competitive bidding? I mean, it must have been competitive if it got up to 250.
I'd have to rewatch the video. I think it got pretty competitive. But if we are talking about competitive bidding, so that was 2018. It reached its climax in 2019, where one of the mascots of the convention, she had a stick as part of her costume. This wasn't just a bit of Dow from Bunnings. This is actually a really nice staff. And we agreed we were going to sell it as the final item in the auction. And old mate, who's got the hammer, he was bidding in it. But
this is the hammer which he'd made from the religious stick and the religious box to combine them together to make the hammer.
Combine them together and made the hammer, yeah. But there was this teenage boy who was cosplaying as I think he was I can't remember, someone from Oran High School Host Club, and he was bidding for the stick,
The cosplay
as well.
stick. That was a very elaborate cosplay stick. Yep.
Yeah,
But a
and-
teenage boy, you'd kind of, at that point as an auctioneer, sorry to interrupt, but suddenly there's a kind of moral question here around, you're a young kid and you can get swept away in the moment here. Okay, so what happens next? So this young teenage kid dressed in the school uniform of Udon Host Club.
What happened next was that a bunch of his friends all came and sat with him, and they all started contributing money to his bids as well. So they were actually working together to try and get the bid and make sure get the stick and make sure that the original stick winner couldn't get it. And it actually reached the point where people were actually getting up out of their seats and actually walking over to people he'd never met before
And contributing.
their own money to help him win the stick.
Wow.
At the climax.
So
of
there were almost like factions emerging, like proper political factions emerging organically.
It was absolutely, and one of the really great things, the theme for AvCon that year was, it was an RPG theme, Join the Party. And for those of you who aren't RPG fans, an RPG is a kind of game where, like Final Fantasy or Pokemon, where you play a main character who then meets other characters and they join you and you take place in turn-based combat against one or more opponents. But generally your party is going to be pretty substantial, between 4 and 12 characters maybe, and at the end we said, okay, let's get everyone up on stage. So the guy who had the hammer, Guts, who had won the stick and the box in the previous years, he came up on stage and he had a couple of mates, and he's a big guy, he's a carpenter, and he's about 6 foot. He was wearing a suit of armor that he'd made, not real armor but foam armor, and carrying this huge hammer. And then all these teenagers come up and they're wearing their wigs and their school uniforms, and it actually looks like there were at least 12 of them there, and it actually looked like the final boss from a Japanese RPG.
Wow, so that's a perfect transposition in terms of the mechanics and narrative of a Japanese RPG final boss battle, organically having happened through an auction space, right? So auctions aren't the space normally you'd have a improvised dramatic theatrical encounter, but it was in this space, right? Suddenly, you brought on to say, so there you are emceeing this event, and you've got on the stage the final boss, the carpenter guy in armor with the hammer, looking like a final boss, and then the school kids, or cosplaying school kid teenagers from Udon Host Club, very much like a band of role players. What happened next?
Okay, so if you're interested in watching this on YouTube, and you're listening to this later, just turn this off, press mute now, and
I'll post a link up
because
as well.
because it is on YouTube, AvCon Auction 2019. But what happened next was they were essentially taking it in turns to bid on it, just like turn-based combat in a JRPG, and it reached the point where it got up to about $1,100.
No.
And Guts was getting the shakes because that was his house down payment that he was starting to use to fund this bidding war. And eventually, at $1,200, he said, for $1,200 they can take it. And so the kids all chucked in a total of $1,200, and they won the stick. And there were just...
Oh my God.
There were photos. We got them all at the front of the stage. People were snapping away. Then they went out the front. They did poses. They had this guy who'd started it, this kid who'd started it, kneeling and holding up the stick. And all the people who'd contributed to the winning bid were standing around him in a semicircle.
Around how many was that by the end? What was 20 people more?
It was at least 12. It might have been 20, but...
Okay.
I couldn't tell you the exact number, but it was definitely double digits. There were a few people there.
All right, so the maths looks a little better. Look, it's an ambivalent moment, isn't it? Because I think in the moment, it's a perfect narrative, right? And it's very much, performing so much kind of fictional genre work, right? So you've got a end battle from a Japanese RPG, the kind of turn-based combat which is occurring through the auction mechanic. But you also have interrupting that a very real world stress, which is occurring, right? So as you're saying, and again, it's interesting to describe the stick hammer guy as also being a carpenter, right? So he's this guy, laborer, worker, much like everyone, who has his family, who has his savings, and is thinking of, like, how did you find out he was that this was a down payment on a house issue? Did he say that during the auction, or?
No, we had a chat about it afterwards.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah.
I see him once a year every time I go up to Adelaide, so we just had a bit of a chin wag, and he was like, "Yeah, that was my mortgage down payment that I was gambling. I was getting the shakes."
Yeah, so interrupting that fictional narrative is this real world stress in terms of, okay, so outside of that bubble of what's happening on the stage and being swept away in the moment, there is life after the bubble of having spent that amount of money on an object. Was there any narrative after that you heard? Like, what happened? Like, I kind of think if these are teenagers, well, like a group of people buying it, was there like since that date has there been a story around what happened next? You know, parents were really upset at the kids, or?
I do not believe so. I could not tell you what the fallout was.
The fallout, yeah. I guess that's what I'm asking. Was there any fallout? But we don't know. Yeah,
I would say probably because that was
how much of it was 12,000?
1,200.
1,200. Still a substantial amount of money for while indeed a wonderful cosplay object. You know, typically those type of things would go for like 100 or something max, I'd imagine. Or how much would you be looking at? 200, 300 max for cosplay objects?
I reckon this thing would have been $50 if that.
Right.
Including labor. It was. I mean, it was nice. Don't get me wrong. It was a very nice prop. But it wasn't a $1,200 prop.
No. Look, yeah, so the economy, and people do pay others to make cosplay objects, and yeah, so the kind of, even within the economy of cosplaying, which has its own metrics, this object is not $1,200. It would be, 10% that, if that. Okay, so what was so the fallout of that was, but that was an extreme, right? That was like in your life of emceeing and beyond that, attending conventions. This is a kind of outlier that has not been repeated.
No, that was. I don't think I can top that. I mean, I said that about the original stick, but it was just, I've never seen something like it when you essentially have the final boss from a JRPG happening on stage right in front of you.
And everyone kind of realized that kind of moment escalated because it became like watching a real life video game.
Yeah, people were talking about it on stage. My co-host was the first one to point it out, and I was like, "Yeah, this is extremely in theme. This is a once in a lifetime moment to actually see a real life JRPG battle."
And look, I'm so ambivalent about that story. I love it because it's a perfect encapsulation of taking the fictional into the real, right? So it's a wonderfully blurred thing that only happens in conventions, right? Conventions are the only spaces where that third space sometimes occur, right? You've got a literate community that shares an affinity for something that is literate of the conventions. And then you have the fact that it's in a convention space where you're seated down and there's a stage there. So it's a bit like watching a theater play, or there's a mode of watching there that you kind of get into. So it is something that's perfect that only happens in conventions. But then there's also this, like the fallout question, right? What? There are other worlds apart from this fictional video game world where that act is judged negatively, right? Where that is kind of like, wow, that until it was that amount of money, like that amount of money, oh wow. Well, we might look at the comments later on in the YouTube clip. What I'll do is I'll post some information up on that with the show notes. Let's go for a short music thing now and come back and talk a little bit more about some of the crazy events that happen in conventions. I think I'm getting myself primed for a post-COVID world. I know we're still in the middle of COVID, but it does feel like let's start talking about histories and kind of getting back with people in the future. This is Media Tackle, everything in and around the world of media. And as we've been doing for pretty much this hour, talking with MC Dent about some of his experiences hosting these conventions for pop culture that have been in Tassie as well as mainland Australia and around the world, of course. These are global phenomena. So we're at the top of the hour, so heading towards just wrapping things up. Any kind of do's or don'ts for conventions that come to mind? Anything for people that have never been there that you would like to raise a flag around?
Cosplay is not consent.
And what does that mean? Unpacking that.
Unpacking that, so just because somebody is dressed as a character that you like, and quite often people do become very attached to sci-fi, fantasy, anime characters as a result of the fandoms that they join. But just because someone is dressed as that character doesn't mean that you know them, doesn't mean that you're friends with this person, doesn't mean that person wants to talk to you. If you want a photo, definitely ask. If you want to ask them for a hug, I mean, they have every right to say no. Treat them with respect.
And that's so interesting. Look, and I think I'll have to have you back in the future to talk about those rules that are there in conventions. They're very interesting spaces. As we've just been recounting, there are bizarre things which can emerge within them around blurring the fictional and real. Suddenly you're in an auction that becomes a video game. But yeah, there are these rules around ethics, around how to photograph within these convention spaces, which can be really difficult to appreciate if you've never been into those spaces again. So stay tuned for a future episode. We'll get you back in, MC Dent, to talk about some of the other cosplay and hosting experiences you've had. And yeah, hopefully the next time we bring you in, there will actually be some events. There are some events coming around the corner, aren't there? There's quiz shows and whatnot.
Yep. So there'll be a quiz show run by Taspop, hosted by myself and George Williams, who's done quiz nights for quite a few years now. That'll be happening either in late January or early February at Good Games on Brisbane Street. Still trying to lock in the date, so keep an eye on the Taspop page. And also there'll be a geek market run by Taspop at the Arc Youth Recreation Centre, and I believe that's on February the 21st, if that is a Saturday. It's either the 21st or the 27th. Head along to Taspop on Facebook and check that out. I cannot remember off the top of my head. I'm sorry, Theo. Please don't hurt me.
So that's Taspop, Taspop.
Yep.
Taspop. So just look for that on Facebook, and I'll have all those details. Well, thank you so much, MC Dent. It's been wonderful having you in. Any final words?
Thank you for having me, Craig Norris, PhD.
Thank you.